Hello, you're listening to Abstract AF, and I'm Sneha Jaiswal. In this episode, we're going to be quickly reviewing 10 books that I read last month, and maybe it can help you decide if you should read them. So let's begin with book number one. It's called A River in Darkness by Masaji Ishikawa. It's a non fictional autobiographical book about a man who lived in North Korea for over 3 decades and how he almost miraculously managed to escape from the country. Ishikawa's father was Korean, his mother was Japanese, and their family moved to North Korea, lured by deceptive promises of a better life. While their life in Japan was nowhere near comfortable, nothing could have prepared them for the harsh, impoverished life in North Korea. I've already done a longer review in episode 13 with a friend, so you can check that out. So I'll keep it extremely short here. A River in Darkness is very depressing. It gets dark and gloomy, and the reader can feel overwhelmed by it. But it's a great book to understand how millions of Korean immigrants who were living in Japan were basically forced into becoming starving slaves in North Korea. Do not pick it up if you're looking for a fun light book because it's the exact opposite of that. Book number two is a novella called Three Men and a Maybe by Katie Lovell. It's a very small book about a girl who gets proposed by three different men on the same night. And all this happens on New Year's night at a bar, and it's quite comical. The men who ask her out include an ex-fiancé who had gambled away all their savings in the past, a best friend who has always been by her side, and a random bartender who she met only days ago. Three Men and a Maybe is cheesy, predictable, and the plot seems straight out of a script for a low-budget Hollywood romantic comedy. Would I recommend the book though? Not really, unless you want to read a quick city romantic story. Book number three is a graphic novel called Chosen, which is based on the true story of the Chosen Reservoir campaign during the Korean War. 15,000 US soldiers and Marines were surrounded by 120,000 Chinese soldiers, but the American troops managed to survive and rescue over 90,000 refugees. The description of the book sounded extremely intriguing and exciting, but the artwork in the graphic novel does not match up to the reader's expectation. In fact, even the storytelling is not great and gets confusing at points, especially because there is no clear protagonist. The only positive takeaway from reading this graphic novel was that it made me look up the Chosen Reservoir battle, and I learned several additional facts about the Korean War. Moving on to book number four, it's the 1973 novel called Sula by Toni Morrison. Now, Morrison has an impressive bio. She won the Pulitzer Prize for her 1987 novel Beloved and went on to win the Nobel Prize in Literature in 1993. However, Sula, which is a novel about two childhood girlfriends who grew up in a black neighborhood called the Bottom, wasn't very impressive. I felt like the book was a superficial look at the life of a young black woman, Sula, who's ostracized in her hometown because despite pushing 30, she's unmarried, amorous, and constantly sleeping with taken men. I understand the fact that such a story for the 1970s might have been groundbreaking. You know, a woman who has no intention to marry and settle down could have caused quite a sensation back then, but well, not so much now. There are several other interesting characters and shocking incidents that might jolt the reader a little, but it's just not enough. So, should you read it? Maybe not. But I do intend to read more of Morrison's work. Let's talk about book number five now. It's titled Bonjour Tristesse by Francois Sagan. It's about a father daughter duo called Cecil and Raymond who love spending their time in the company of beautiful and wealthy people. Cecil is only 17, but her father doesn't try to micromanage her life and lets her go on dates with whoever she's interested in. So it was interesting to read about a father and daughter pair who are almost like siblings or friends. Cecil, however, feels like their carefree life is threatened when her philanderer father gets serious about a woman. So she does some regrettable things that add twists and make the story a tragicomedy of sorts. I really enjoyed reading the book. The writing is great. The descriptions are just enough for the viewer to get a sense of the setting and not get too bored. This Penguin classic gets a big thumbs up from me. Moving on to book number six, it's called Frustrations of Being Deaf by Dave Blackwell. This is a non-fiction compilation of personal incidents where people are nothing but arrogant assholes to the author who cannot hear. It was a frustrating read, but also very entertaining. Frustrating because you can feel the exasperation of the author who is subjected to a lot of humiliation and ridiculous behavior by people who just don't know how to deal with somebody who cannot hear. For example, several people tell Dave Blackwell, You don't look deaf. I mean, how does one not look deaf? What the hell is that supposed to mean? So, the author details a lot of such personal experiences where he is discriminated against, and it's extremely sad and funny at the same time. I think it's a fun book which helps raise awareness about people who are deaf. The editing of the book was a little off, but overall, it's a good pick for anybody who has never met someone who cannot hear. Okay, now let's get to book number 7. It is a graphic novel called Trillium by Jeff Lemire. Just thinking about this book is making my head spin a little. This was a mind bending story about time travel, parallel worlds, space exploration, intergalactic races, weird aliens, and a sentient virus. I actually got confused once or twice about what was happening in the beginning because science fiction is pretty much alien territory for me. However, at the heart of it, Trillium is actually a love story about William and Nika, who are both human but belong to different time periods. They meet accidentally due to a mysterious temple that is housed to a time machine. But because they are from different planets and different time periods, can they end up together? Well, that's the big question. TV news style. The artwork in the book is quite nice. It has Jeff Lemire's signature style of drawing. He has this ability to make things seem gloomier than they are in his comic back. He has this ability to make things seem gloomier than they are in his comic panels, but it works for serious plot lines. I love the fact that there are many strong women characters in the story apart from Nika. In fact, Lemire cleverly reverses gender roles during the second half of the book, so you witness a matriarchal America where men appear to be the weaker gender. So it's the women who are lead commanders at wars, while the men do the grunt work. If you like love stories complicated by time and space differences, you should check Trillium out. Moving on to number 8, it's a 18 plus yaoi manga called Nights by Ku Yoneda. It's a collection of short stories, and what really sets it apart from other books in the same genre is the fact that the plots are realistic and not exaggerated or fantasy like. The last story, in fact, is borderline mundane yet sweet. It's a blossoming romance between a shy car mechanic and an introverted sales guy working in the same place. There are actually only 3 stories in the book, but all of them are very diverse. The first one involves the Japanese mafia, known as the Yakuza, while the second one, titled Emotion Spectrum, is set in high school and it's about a guy trying to play wingman for a fellow student, but things get a little messed up. If you like the yaoi manga genre, you should definitely pick this book up. It's called Nights by Ku Yoneda. Book number 9 is a novella called Evidence of the Affair by TAYLOR JENKINS REID. The story is told exclusively through letters written between the protagonists, Carrie and David. Carrie starts writing to David after she finds incriminating letters that prove her husband is having an affair with David's wife. So, this book is about how two complete strangers use each other as a support system to cope up with their cheating spouses. It's a quick little book, but I didn't enjoy reading it much because the letters sounded very similar, as if the same person was writing all of them. Basically, the writer's voice fails to be unique when it comes to different characters, so the reader might not feel invested in what's happening to them. You can give it a shot if you like epistolary novels. For those who may not know, epistolary novels are books that are written in the form of letters, diary entries, or newspaper clippings. Dracula by Bram Stoker is an early example. So now we'll move on to the final book on the list, book number 10, a short story collection called Teresa's Man and Other Stories from Goa by Damodar Mauzo. This was a very light-hearted, relatable, and grounded book that had slice of life kind of stories about all sorts of people in India, especially Goans. The stories were written between the 1960s and early 2000s, so some of the themes might seem a little outdated to modern readers. A few of them might seem a little regressive. In fact, a few of them might seem a little regressive. Like the title story itself, Teresa's Man, was about an unemployed man who lives off his wife's money and ends up being a wife beater. It felt like domestic violence was glorified in the story, and I didn't like it at all. But most of the other tales were very nice and engaging. The writer Mauzo intricately sets up each short story and pulls you into the life of his characters, and you are left wanting for more by the end of it. His storytelling made me interested in his work, and I'm looking forward to reading more titles by him and would definitely recommend this one. Well, that's all for this episode. Talk to you in the next one.